Night blooms orange over a ridge that has forgotten what cool feels like. Pines snap like brittle bones. A hillside breathes in heat and exhales sparks that wander like errant fireflies. A helicopter thunders low and drops a silver arc that turns to steam before it finds flame. On Tegrun, Lila pushes a McLeod tool into soil so dry it rings. Her visor is traced with ash. In the headlamp halo, the world is reduced to needles, ember, breath. Hold the line at the creek, the radio says. And there is no creek, only a ribbon of stones the summer took. For weeks, a high-pressure dome has sat over the Mediterranean and the Balkans like a hand. Heat that used to come and go has come and stayed. Relative humidity and daylight fell so low, the forests whispered secrets to anyone who listened. We are tinder now. Fire, weather those three enemies. Heat, wind, dryness stacked their odds. A plume rises, ribs of hot air inside it, building toward a pyrocumulus cloud that eats smoke and throws lightning from its own belly. People look up and film it because it is terrible and beautiful and new only to the extent that there is more of it now. Lila kneels beside a charcoal log and feels for residual heat. She could have been anywhere. In Greece, in the hills of California, on the edge of the Australian bush during the Black Summer, in a Canadian boreal forest that burned into peat in memory last year. Different languages, same crunch underfoot. She knows the physics, even if she does not speak them in equations. Warmer air holds more water vapor. Each degree gives the sky permission to carry roughly 7% more. When the sky does not let go, when it does let go, it lets go like a fist, unclenching all at once. Hundreds of kilometers away, over water colored like tarnished copper by Saharan dust, a satellite scans. On a monitor, Aina watches the sea skin glow warmer than the mapmaker's blues. Patches red like fevers. 2-3 degrees above what a fisherman born before satellites would call normal. The contour lines of a low-pressure warp and tighten. She drags a cursor through wind shear, ocean heat content, the warm layer's depth. A list of probabilities climbs. Rapid intensification possible. She types, then deletes possible, and writes likely. The ocean, she knows, is a battery. This year, the terminals are clean, the wire short. They draw you. On a floodplain, far from the sea, Omar kicks at cracked silt with a boot and tries to remember the year when the river behaved like a patient elder. The monsoon used to arrive with 1,000 small feet. Lately it breaks like a plate. In 2022, in the low, wide country, between the Indus and its ghosts of old paths, it came in waves that drowned roads and textured satellite images with brown where green should have been. The phrase 1 in 100 years has been mouthed so often, it has lost its shape. He remembers water in his living room up to his chest, and the aloof kindness of a neighbor's tractor. On paper, Omar is a junior head. In practice, he is a watcher of edges over veer against bank, sky against horizon, canal against village lane. He reads the forecasts and the bias that always leans from words toward reality too late. High likelihood of heavy precipitation, the bulletin says. He walks the levee that holds because someone decided that River S old meander should be straight now. He hears frogs, additioning for night. He tastes dust. The first fat drops turn to mud. He checks a gauge with a stick and pencil and remembers the smell his mother said arrived before floods. Raw, metallic, like wet nails. Wind turns on Lila's fire the way a news cycle turns a story. Suddenly, from one angle, then another, then from everywhere, a flaming cone leaps a road in 1-2 breaths. The line howls above the ridge, the underbelly of the plume flashes lightning born in smoke. In the village below, sprinklers turn on roofs. Someone points a hose into an orange valley. Cars nose outward with plates rattling. A dog insists on returning for a toy. A man walks in the wrong direction until a firefighter puts a hand flat on his chest and says one word that means many. No. Anna hates nights like this, when screens say her name in tiny font at the bottom of a television and people think certainty is a service. She knows what the atmosphere is doing. She knows which way the storms will likely blink. She also knows that the last 5 years have bred a new animal. Storms that bulk fast. Cyclones that vault a category overnight. Hurricane eyes that stare into warm eddies and refuse to blink. She zooms in. The banding wraps tighter. She types. All preparations to protect life and property should be rushed to completion. Her finger hovers over send, not because she doubts the sentence, but because she knows how it will sound through a radio at 3 a.m. A child drinks from a steel cup as the wind lifts the corner of a tarpaulin. A farmer ties his paddock gate with wire that is already doubling as antenna. A nurse counts, gauze rolls, and writes the number on her wrist, because she will lose the paper. In a high country, lousy with pines, a single match flicked careless becomes a headline. In a city with basements rented to people whose first language is not the one spoken at the press conference, a man rolls his mattress up off the floor because he learned a lesson last time he woke to water. The first big drop hits Omar's cheek and leaves a cold trail. He smiles without humor. The sky is a wall. Far upstream, 3 rivers are making one. He hears the low, thick sound that comes with water when it is not water yet. Just promise. The promise is sincere. The levee snakes away into dark. He puts his palm on the embankment and feels it hold firm and remembers a year when it did not, and how the failure was like a ripping noise that never left his ears. His phone vibrates with a warning he can recite. He imagines the children in houses that lean toward the river. He thinks of the first thunder. He thinks of the last quiet breath. The sound that comes next is not thunder. It is lower, closer, like a long, deep exhale forced through a closed throat, and he turns toward it. In time to see the levee shiver, the vibration runs under his boots like an animal fleeing. A seam opens where grass met gravel an hour ago. The water does not explode through. It insinuates. First a finger, then a fist. Then it remembers momentum and turns the breach into a mouth. Omar is already moving along the crown, yelling in a voice that works best 30 years in the future when his knees are bad and the village boys call him uncle. Wake your families. He shouts at a tiny rectangle of light that is a door. Go. Now. It is not panic if you have no room left for hesitation. Water enters a lane like a stray buffalo that will not be backed out. It stacks bronze reflections on satellite dishes, eats the lower steps, takes the floor next. Chickens become tiny ships. A bicycle becomes a question. By the time the mosque's speaker coughs and delivers the oldest message in the newest tone, the river has already delivered itself. Omar bangs on a shutter and the man who opens it looks first, irritated. 10 opened it. 2 continents west. A city of basements. Pretends it is made of stone. Mateo sleeps with a fan on and 1 foot out from under a sheet. The sound that wakes him is not rain. The city loves the sound of rain. It transforms it as water finding a crack in a vocabulary of old brick and new repair. He steps onto a floor that is a surprise. In 20 seconds, the water is to his ankle. In a minute, the stairs are a tight waterfall. He throws his suitcase onto the bed and pulls the older tenant's door until it yields. She stands with her hair in curlers and says a prayer that belongs to another country. They move together, laddering up the hallway to a door that leads to a courtyard, that leads to a gate, that leads to a sidewalk in 3 minutes. That is a stream. On this street, a car floats slightly every floods. Unnerving physics demonstration. The radar that woke Anna with its tone is not her bedside alarm. It is a deep ping behind her eyes she gets when the outer bands start paying her the kind of attention that a musician pays a score. The cyclonic core tightened overnight. Eyes sharpening. A kind of predator unfolding. She listens to the ocean like a stethoscope. Mixed layer deep, sheer low, upper outflow good. The list adds to 1 word. Fuel. The phrase for what she fears is 3 nouns: rapid intensification, and it has become less rare because the sea that feeds it has become less stingy with heat. She has read the papers, how the trend line tilts. She has felt it too. The calls that start with, but it wasn't forecast, and end quiet. Omar throws himself into a John boat and poises a pole like a pike. He knows where the road is, by memory. Where the ditches by the way the boat leans. He yells, not names, but instructions. Higher ground, he calls, and his voice carries because there is so little else but water to muffle it. He throws a rope to a roof where a family sits, their sandals aligned neatly, an order they could control. He ties off on a mango tree that still believes it is dry. In the boat, a toddler clutches a plastic dinosaur and stares at him as if he is the one who made this night. Across the world, in a river valley where old vineyards hold on to steepness, a thunderstorm that lost its license to move sits and empties its cargo. The creek that runs photogenic gathers intention, climbs its banks where walls think they have seen everything. A bridge becomes driftwood and takes what clings to it. Sirens chase their tails. In the morning, when the cloud finally remembers their other towns, aerial photos will show houses ripped open like dollhouses you can see inside, rooms intact, but outside, the private made public by water. Here the argument will begin. This is beyond living memory, so how plan for it? There, someone will say with excellent patience. We told you the statistics changed. The dice are loaded now. Lila hears thunder for the first time in 3 weeks, and smiles a tight smile no one sees. The fire will lie down, she thinks. Then she remembers the freshly hydrophobic soils, the way rain skates on ash like oil on steel, the way ghoulies that forgot their names will write them again, fast in black water. She knows the next hazard will speak in a different register. From flame to mud. We need to clear drains on the downslope, she says, and her crew looks at her like she has asked them to fold laundry while the roof burns. She nods. Before it starts, the sky above Aina Storm becomes textured with circles, a sign of power organizing itself. The central pressure falls faster than she wanted. Models that looked sober last night now look drunk on possibilities. Neither she nor her grandmother, who told stories about storms in a village far away, would have thought likely. The cone leans toward a coast built low, where marsh was once treated as nuisance and made straight. She imagines shelf waters heating current in surge, adds what the tide chart says, subtracts what the seawall can hold. Get inland, she says into a camera, with a face that will be quoted later. In the middle of this tapestry, in a city whose name will be said carefully in newsrooms in 3 days, Salma checks the doors of her clinic and listens to the rain. It has a thick sound, like wet wool thrown on stone. Upstream are 2 dams everyone takes for granted, the way one takes for granted the tendon in one's wrist until it pops. The dams are old and have been mended with words and some concrete. Storm Daniel, someone decided that was the name, has already broken. Records over mountains that are usually the ones wringing water from air, not swallowing it whole. A phone buzzes with a rumor about cracks. She puts it down and checks the generator. Outside, water juices the center of the street. It makes sense of slope and of time. She pulls the clinic file that has the list of names of patients who cannot walk upstairs quickly. She looks at the ceiling when thunder literally shakes dust down. She hears a new sound, a far, sustained tearing that shares something with avalanches and broken promises, and she fumbles for the door latch. And the door slams in her hand from the pressure change that precedes the water. It arrives not as a wave crest, but as a wall carrying a town-s inventory. Refrigerators that buck like animals, couches that collapse into themselves, cars that rotate on their sides. With the eerie deliberation of whales, men knocked clean off their feet while still holding a plastic bag their brain thought could be saved. The noise is beyond scale. It's the sound of an entire hillside moving through a street. The sound of concrete remembering it is gravel and rejoining the river. The upper dam is gone, and with it the lower. A failure that lived long before tonight in reports and in arguments, and in the phrase after the war. Solna is thrown against a filing cabinet, and then onto the crest of something that used to be a door. She rides it until it catches a corner and pivots and narrowly fails to wedge under a lintel. Hands grab her under the armpits and haul. Somewhere a generator gasps and goes quiet. Somewhere a phone keeps recording until the water finds it, and the last frame will be a light swinging, then dark, then nothing. This city will be a map of absences by morning. In another place, in another heat, alarms go off under a different sky. A wind pours down a canyon in California and turns retardant to mist. Paradise becomes a name that sits wrong in the mouth. Evacuation routes from the 1970s hold traffic from 2018 poorly. A red glow on a ridge becomes a run of flame, becomes a sprint. The grid goes black, and with it information. People drive by faith and brake lights. A woman still in her slippers calls her neighbor's name into an air that smells like hot pennies. The statistics that'll be written after this someplace else: wind speeds, gusts, dew points, 97th percentile fuel. Moisture mean nothing here, in the racket of embers on a windshield. On an island with winds that are supposed to bring sweet relief, grass that should have been eaten to its roots by animals, turned to hazard by policy and a chain of neglect. A line flaps in a gale and throws a spark. In minutes, a town of wood and history drinks flame. The sirens that should have cast a net of noise over the old streets are silent. Residents do not hear the word they needed: uphill. The ocean does not accept them because fire moves as fast as a car when it is fed this way. By morning, a row of tin roofs sits over air. Hearsing starts too early, ends too late. Rage finds a target, and sometimes it is the wind, and sometimes it is a decision made years ago by someone who no longer lives here. Back at the flood, as water knuckles against buildings, Salma triages by voice. "You, yes. Come here," she says, dragging an old woman who wears the smell of kerosene. "You, wait," to a man who insists his broken finger must be seen now. "You, help me." When the current slackens, for a breath, the city is visible as an anatomy lesson in cross-section. Houses spliced open, bedrooms exposed, a calendar clinging above a bed that likely floated. Night becomes the longest hour. She writes numbers on forearms with a pen that does not like wet skin. She says names back when they are shouted like talismans. She swallows her fear of the after, the part where help takes the long road around politics and arrives fractionally late. Lila's burnt ridge, under rain now turned to urgent, sheds its skin. The ash layer, hydrophobic as wax, sends water sideways. Someone yells mud, and the word isn't big enough. Not mud debris, afraid of log, rock, soot, moving fast. The ditch she wanted cleared seizes. The road turns to slurry. A car that crept out of a driveway because the family thought the fire was the only danger spins in a slow circle and submarines on its side. Leela hears her name like a hammer and turns. She sees a figure in brown water, eyes rimmed white like a horse's. She throws a rope and prays for friction. When the rope goes taut, she feels the weight of the person, yes, but also the heaviness of the time, of the long, compounded season that made this strand of seconds. Wind over warm ocean thickens a storm's eye wall. The plane that flew into it, no one outside meteorology understands how wild that sentence is. Reports back with numbers that make forecasters sit up. Pressure falls. Flight level winds tick into a new range. Onshore evacuation orders turn into knotted decisions. "We're high enough," a man says, standing on a slab poured at a time when the sea was lower by centimeters that had become the difference between inconvenience and grief. A nurse tapes plastic over a window and then stops, because it will not matter if the surge comes the way the map on the screen suggests. Mateo, whose basement is now a story for people in other cities, stands on a stoop and looks at what the storm did when geography and gravity conspired with a drainage system that knows a different climate. The word unprecedented sits like a food no one asked for. He meets a city worker whose sleeves are fresh with water, whose eyes are tired and good. "We built 4 yesterday," the worker says, surprising himself with poetry. Both of them look at a grate that is still swallowing rain. Both of them know that grate cannot be made bigger overnight, that the reshaping of a place will take more than silver words and money that arrives as discussion. A neighbor offers coffee, and it is the best kind there is. Hot, and especially undeserved. The breaking point is not a single point. It is the accumulation of ridges and breaches, of rooms made outdoors, of sirens and their absence, of winds behaving like thieves, of water that refuses containment, of smoke that does not respect borders. It is the moment a firefighter in Portugal and a forecaster in Florida and a hydrologist in Sind and a doctor in Derna and a renter in Queens all speak the same sentence and mean 5 different things. It cannot go on like this. Then the sky clears for the first time in weeks, and you can see the ocean. Its horizon like a promise, and the mountainous outline like the back of an animal at rest. It's a lie, or it's a pause. Lila leans against the truck. Salma sits on a step that did not exist yesterday. Ayana looks at a track forecast and tries to make it less true with concentration. Omar tests the repaired levee with his heel. The first day of the next season has already started, and they can feel it in their teeth. A thunderhead looms off a coastline where houses squat on concrete stilts, like birds with long legs, ready to lift. The water temperature graphic clocks a color that is almost absurd. Ana's cursor hovers over an evacuation zone line that was drawn for another century. She hears the door of the briefing room click and the chief sit. "Give it to me straight," he says. But not because he wants comfort. The click of a pen, the hum of a vent, the low rumble beyond the window, every sound adds to what the next hours will need to hold. She speaks, and the room stills. And somewhere a car turns on and moves toward a highway that will soon be a chew line on a map. "The surge," she says, "will go here." And with her finger she traces a blue thumbprint over neighborhoods that came up out of Martian bargain and promise. "If the core wobbles 5 miles," she says, "it's another story. But this is the story we have to write for." The chief nods, his head a metronome to a beat that is about to speed up. Wind leans into palms and makes them gossip. Water in canals churns white without needing a boat to wrinkle it. The family that waited through the last one decides at the last moment not to wait for this. They pack the irreplaceable in a plastic bin that embarrasses itself by being so small. A folder of papers, a grandmother's ring, a drawing that is only understood by the hand that made it. The rest will be what it will be. Elsewhere, a different sky. Smoke takes a city hostage at noon and turns at Marchand, a New York that is suddenly aware of Alberta's trees. The sidewalks fill with new masks, a ritual learned in one disaster becoming useful in another. Flights divert. People taste a coin in the air and call it campfire until they realize campfires do not last this long. Someone on the radio says, "Piro cumulonimbus," and someone else says, "What?" And the first person explains thunderclouds born from fire. Acid that launch smoke into heights where it can travel continents. The idea lands with a hollow thud, and then the sound returns. A hum through the windows, a pressure in the chest. Lila watches a strip of black hillside get stitched with green. It is the kind of hope that is dangerous if you turn it into policy. She stands with a ranger who remembers when flames were a tool and who wants them to be again, under weather and fuel conditions of their choosing. She lights a drip torch in late winter, a lizard of fire crawling in a line designed to save a town in summer. A neighbor thinks she is mad and that smoke is always bad. She wants to hand them a century of indigenous memory, of mosaics that made forests hold and breathe slow. She has only a pamphlet and her own thin authority. She watches the little line do its work with the patience of someone who knows there are not enough of these slow flames and too many big ones. Omar stands where the levee failed last year and looks at the new cross-section like a doctor looks at a scar. The shoulder is wide now. The slope is benched. The toe is armored with stone heavy enough to make his back ache. Just imagining it, he knows it is not proof against what the river can bring when the sky decides to test men. But he also knows that tonight someone could sleep because a decision in daylight didn't he dodge the cost. He sees a child throw a paper boat into a ditch and wonders whether they will remember this shape of bank when they are 40, and he is 60. And the monsoon. Escalanda has shifted again, and a storm lurches toward land with the vanity of an athlete who has found the music in their own movement. The eye-wall gusts crackle with torn shreds of lightning. The storm tide sets up a bulge of sea, pushed by day-long wind that rides behind the shore like a spy. Then comes the peak. Houses that looked like fortresses cough, then let their ground floors go. A car lights flicker and fail underwater. Rescue boats learn the humbling geometry of floating over fences and hedges. A woman waves from a second-floor window with the composure of someone who will survive and later call this the water as if that word could hold it. Anna listens to amateur radio frequencies when the cell towers do their own version of fleeing. She hears voices steadying other voices by telling the small truth. We are a-coming in a delta far from here. Tidal rivers rise and shrink and rise again with a storm that cannot decide where to spend its violence. In a country that learned with terrible rigor how to shelter before cyclones, concrete rooms on mounds hold hundreds. The doors close. The noise becomes one note, a rattle and an animal moan. After, the tally is brutal, but smaller than it would have been, because of lessons people taught each other the hard, worthy way. Someone writes this in a report that will be read by an intern in a place where a new levee is being sketched, and the intern will pause, briefly, over the line that connects a siren to a name. Insurance actuaries look at maps and raise their prices, then lift their pens, then leave some markets entirely. A phrase leaks into the news. Uninsurable. Another. Managed retreat. A billboard says, rebuild strong. Rebuild home. And in the comments beneath there are 3 kinds of anger and 1 clean grief no one knows what to do with. Amaya says we cannot move and is right in ways a scientist is wrong, and also wrong in the only way a scientist is right. Somewhere a city plants trees that will shade a block 3 degrees cooler in a heat wave and save an elderly man who will never know the sapling saved him. Somewhere else, a hillside gets nailed up with mesh and bolts, and rock that loved to fall learns to stay. A little Salma stands on a slab of earth that used to be a street and watches the river run a new course, as if the ground shrugged and said, here. A soldier with a shovel and a 1,000-yard stare moves dirt from one place to another because that is what we do when we need to feel the slope is listening. A hydrologist points to a cross-section someone else stares through. The argument turns from who to how. Salma finds a Clinic S metal cabinet downstream and opens it as if the order inside might have been preserved. It wasn't. She sits on it and writes a list of tetanus shots wanted, antibiotics required, water filters that will arrive late. The page wrinkles with damp. Aina's finger hovers over a keyboard not to issue a warning now, but to commit to a post-event analysis that will, in a perfect world, shave minutes off next time. She knows minutes are a currency as difficult to print as money. She writes, re-began at O2Z, core shrank. I will replaced. She wonders if anyone reading this 5 years hence will be bored because this has become the new usual, or if someone will feel the same shiver she did. She saves the document and moves to the next screen. Replenishment requests for a team that lost their radar dome to wind. She adds a line. More radios that do not depend on cell towers. Lila helmet off, hair plastered to her temples, sits with a group of volunteers who came because smoke filled their own living rooms on a Tuesday 2 months ago and they wanted to earn the right to change a thing. They are tired in a way that allows no speech. She reaches for a map and traces with a soot-blackened finger the places where the line held and where it didn't. She marks, small and neat, the drain they cleared before the rain. She marks, with a dot, the place where the rope caught and the person lived. And in the white space beyond the line, she draws with her finger the contour of next season. The storm takes its time, leaving. When it goes, it leaves a sound like silence but thicker. A dragonfly that must have been born in that rain zigzags and stutters to a landing on a mailbox leaned like a drinker. An egret's move from ditch to ditch checking for what the water left in its hurry. Heat breathes back as if it wants applause. The forecast says a front will break it on Wednesday. That is 3 days away. Between now and then, men in orange shirts will carry furniture that looks like bones and lay it next to the curb. And women will sort keepsakes into categories of salvage and story, and a child will find a fish on a lawn and name it. The window is small for Aina to sleep, for Omar to rest his back on a chair, for Salma to close her eyes in a borrowed tent, for Lila to sit long enough to remember where she put her gloves. Between their breaths, the warmest year on record finishes and hands off to another that is somehow warmer. In that instant of handover, a choice hangs weightless. What do we build? And where? And for whom? And how quickly can we stop feeding the furnace that makes each choice harder? The radar sweeps again. The smell of wet ash rises. The tide clock ticks. The answer is not here yet. It is walking toward them, wearing low and budget and will-like clothing. It is late. It can still be on time. The next advisory blinks ready. And the click it makes when Anna hits send ricochets through rooms and radios. The landfall we feared and prepared for is not the worst case, and not the best. The storm wobbled miles to the right and spared a school that would have made a good shelter but would have been a terrible roof. It pushed water into streets on a grid that remembered to empty because someone cleaned the drains the week before in weather that did not merit heroism. It tested a seawall only to nigh height short of what the engineer had begged in a meeting 2 years ago. A number on a tide gauge stops rising and holds for 1 breath, then 2, and then ticks down. That is the shape of mercy here. Centimeters in a column, boats move like punctuation marks across brown sentences of water. Door-to-door checks become a liturgy. The tally begins and is never as precise as people want, because people are not precise in the way we wish to count them. A dog with a human name rides a pallet and is applauded on shore like a head of state. A man wipes his grandfather's photo with a wet cloth tender as an apology. Volunteers in yellow vests make their way through a list that is everybody's. Far inland, in heat that should be gone by now. A grid holds not because it is strong, but because it is shaded by choices. Cool roofs that turn bleached heat into bearable shadows. Trees that drop night down into afternoons. Microgrids that islanded and hummed when lines elsewhere failed. The temperature nudged a number that would have killed more if the city had not planted years ago. No one notices this saved life. That is the kind of story we must learn to tell. Oma walks the levee again. He sees what worked. The riprap held. The spillway bled off menace. The early text that said, "Go now," instead of "we advised," perhaps. He also sees where water still found a way around. And through always it does. He takes a photograph of a crack that is the width of a spoon because he wants to show that failure starts small. In a school on high ground, he stands before children and draws a river in a wall and a line showing where it is safe to play and where it is not, and they look at him as if he is telling a fairy tale. He thinks of 2022 and does not tell them how it smelled. Salma sits beneath new tarpaulin shade and writes in a fresh notebook, the cover stiff and promising. She writes what they need. Latrines, not slogans. Chlorine, not speeches. Cash, not promises. A plan that draws houses back from the path the river claimed. She writes, restore the dry wadis upstream, plant in the gullies. Leave room for the water to argue. When a man in a crisp shirt arrives with a convoy and asks what they need most, she hands him the notebook and watches his eyes. She can tell who will read and who will archive by the way they take IT palm up as if receiving a gift, palm down as if taking a task. Lila stands with a line of women and men holding drip torches and pulaskis along a cool morning slope. They are starting small fires to make big fires smaller later. It feels wrong until it feels like sense. She had to go to 3 meetings to convince people that smoke now is better than apocalypse smoke later. And even then, half the room disagreed with a kind of certainty only people far from flames can afford. A breeze skates across the new black and carries a smell like coffee. A kid with a shovel watches, wide-eyed, and asks questions that begin with why. Lila directs them all to the oak with blackened bark and green sprout fingers. Because of this, she says simply. Aina clicks through slides in a windowless room under bad fluorescent lights. She shows the plot of sea surface temperature anomalies, marching up like a bad staircase. She shows a bar graph of storms that doubled their wind speeds within 24 hours more often in the last 2 decades than in the decades before. She does not say the name of the coke-colored puddle of money that might be moved into pumps and codes and buyouts. Socius only every 1/10 of a degree matters. Each one buys us or steals from us room. She clicks to a slide with a picture of a street that did not flood because of a berm made of dirt and patience. These are small things that act like big ones when you stack them. There is a list we know now. It is not glamorous. It is not even new. It goes like this. Stop putting homes in floodplains, where floodplains are just old riverbeds on sabbatical. Stop covering hills with houses without first asking the hill how it feels. Make roofs white where it makes sense, and green where it makes sense. Plant trees and water them until they stop needing you. Build codes with teeth and give mayors the jaw to bite. Move people before the water does and pay them enough to not be what the water washes back. Fix drains before the forecast. Burn wisely before summer. Listen to those who managed landscapes before your grandparents did. Put sirens where they can be heard and in languages that can be understood. Share the risk with insurance that is realistic and with public banks that are compassionate. Hand radios to neighborhoods. Measure rain, measure heat, measure humility. Policy, for all its belt and folder, is a story we tell a future. Economics is a narrative about what we're willing to trade. Culture is a habit turned sacred by time. Climate is a paragraph that the planet writes slowly, and we can lean on the pen, lighten the hand that pushes. For 4 years and more, we have watched fires eat time. Storms change their minds faster. Floods rewrite maps overnight. We have learned that compound is not just an interest rate. It is rain on burn scar, surge on sea level rise, heat on aging grid, hunger on migration on politics. The real threat It's not weather. It is the gap between what physics now makes likely and what our systems still pretend is rare. In Himachal, a siren now sounds earlier near a dam, because the mountains learned that ash plus rain equals slurry plus grief. In Pakistan, new flood maps show the old river rewound to before the embankments, and some villages sit off those lines now. In Germany, gauges beep when a creek lifts an inch too fast and police phones blare, and the sentence we did not know has been retired. In Houston, green lots planted after Harvey soak a summer outburst that would have drowned a subdivision 10 years ago. In Bangladesh, a girl holds a cyclone preparedness flag as proud as any medal and knows exactly when to run. In Maui, rebuilt code debates and cultural burns hold a complicated meeting under Kyo shade. There is no single climax where rain apologizes or flame repents. There is only the crescendo and decrescendo of a score we now hear clearly, and the choice to orchestrate back. In a year that was the hottest since record-keeping began, we also made the most wind turbines in history, added the most solar, learned the phrases heat index, an urban canyon, watched insurance companies leave zip codes, and saw cities plant 1,000 saplings at once. Somewhere a council voted to move a road upslope. Somewhere else a vote failed and a community stayed where the map is blue. The ledger is not balanced. It never will be. But it can be changed. On Lila's Ridge, the first wildflowers come up outrageously pink through black. On Omar's Levee, children run along the top like tightrope walkers and wave in a way that makes his heart quit hurting for a second. In Salmastown, a fig sapling goes into ground where the clinic might have stood again, and a nurse waters it out of a jerrycan labeled for fuel and laughs at the incongruity. Anna drives home past a canal that is behaving, sees to her right, sky to her left, and gives herself permission to turn the radio off and hear her own tires. They all sleep, not because the world is safe, but because they've done the work a day demanded. Tomorrow asks, more. We have the tools and the truths. We need the will. If stories like this move you, subscribe for more true events that change the world.